Hello and welcome back to Inspirability. Today I am joined by former Marine, pilot and presenter Arthur Williams. So Arthur, welcome to Inspirability. It is a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Great. No, you are very welcome. So I'm really excited to talk to you today and hear a bit more about your story. So you're a former Marine, you're also a pilot and a presenter. So a man of many trades. So looking forward to finding out a bit more about the man behind the story.
Yeah, master of none, but yeah, I do many things. Yeah.
So tell me, where did it all start?
Where do I begin? I suppose really it all started in the military for me. I come from a big military family. My grandparents were in the RAF on Lancasters. My dad was in the Navy. And so joining the military was a natural progression for me. We were kind of very much not like influenced to go and do it, but it was kind of the only thing that we knew. It was almost like a family trade, I suppose. And so I joined the Marines almost out of school at the age of 17. Did really well, loved it. It was great. Joined 4-2 Commando down in Plymouth and joined Lima Company within 4-2 Commando and got to go to loads of cool places. Went to Norway to do Arctic training, went to Sierra Leone on kind of peacekeeping, I suppose, and lots of really great stuff. And I loved the Marines because I like to think you never crammed as much life into such a short period of time as you do when you're in the military, and particularly the Marines. Like no 2 days were ever the same, and you were always just doing loads of cool stuff.
So tell me a bit about the training for that, because I mean that is an incredible amount of training, and it's pushing you to your limits, and you cover many topics. So tell me what that was like, and maybe what the difference was between the Arthur who went into the Marines and the Arthur who came out of the Marines.
Yeah. Okay. So the Marines training is widely regarded, I think, as the hardest military training course you can do from being a civilian to go into the military. It's 8.5 months. It's 32 weeks, and throughout that process, it's really tough physically, but it's also really tough emotionally as well. They test you psychologically more than anything, probably. And it culminates in these commando tests that you do at the end, like the famous 30-mile yomp and stuff, like which you've got to pass, and they're back to back, and you feel like a broken man before you've even started the tests. And that is one of the ways in which they test you. So throughout the training, each week, they'll set tests at the end of it, of which you've got to achieve in order to progress. And the training that you'll receive during that week is enough to break you in itself. And so when you start the test at the end, you're already like haggard and, I can't do anything. And when you start the commando tests right at the end, I remember doing the last one, the 30-mile yomp across Dartmoor, and being on the sort of threshold of this test, loaded up with kit. I've got blisters the size of, eggs on my feet, and I'm tired. It's 5 a.m, it's dark, I'm cold, I'm wet, I'm hungry. I'm just utterly exhausted, like compound fatigue, like through and through, and thinking I can't barely put one foot in front of the other, let alone do 30 miles within 8 hours. And you go, but well, I'm not going to turn away, so I'll have a go, I'll do it. And you put one foot in front of the other, and you keep plodding along, and you keep going, and you hit the checkpoints, and you eat your banana, your pasty, and your coffee, and your water, and then you make it, and because you make it, that's one of the clever ways in which the Marines kind of condition you, and they bring out this empowerment in you, because they push you to your absolute limit and beyond, and they allow you to prove to yourself that you're more capable of what you believe you can do. And when you have a eureka moment like that, it means that you almost feel invincible. There's nothing that you can't do.
You've broken it down step by step.
Yeah.
I think, how did you keep going through that? Because it would be so easy. I think so many people can probably relate to this, whether it's fitness training or whether it's a struggle they're having in their personal lives. It's so easy. I mean, for me, actually, I can relate to this because I rather madly decided to sign up to the London Marathon.
Oh,
so
great.
I'm doing the marathon coming up. So how do you keep going?
I think I've always been one that I don't really, well, in fact, I'll start that again. The best thing that I can say is don't self-edit. So many people, I think, have this sort of thing inside them that says, I'm not good enough. that's definitely not good enough. That's not going to pass, so I'll stop.
Where did that come from, do you think?
I don't know. Lots of people do it, but I've never done that, and I would definitely recommend don't do it, because even on that 30 miler, I was like, we're well behind the time here. We must be, because we're dawdling a lot. Well, we weren't dawdling, we were running, but it never feels fast enough. And whatever you're doing, because you're striving for the Marines, which have a very high standard, whatever you do, it just doesn't feel quite good enough. But you don't stop until somebody pulls you off. I remember I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. They must think I'm useless, but I'm not going to stop until they tell me I'm not good enough. And I think that that's really important, that everybody applies that, because you just never know. And I know on so many occasions, not just in the military, but in media work afterwards as well, and flying, where people have said, no, I just can't do it, I won't do it. And they were actually fine. So I think it's really important just to give something everything.
That's so true.
Yeah, I think don't give up.
I think we're often too critical on ourselves.
Yeah.
Are you quite self-critical?
Massively. Yeah.
How do you overcome that?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's such a bad thing. I think being your own worst critic is healthy, as long as you can manage it. I think that's how we improve, isn't it? I think if you learn something by making mistakes and doing it wrong. And I think that whenever we do something, if it went right, if it went well, and there's always room for improvement. You're not perfect, and I think that you can still, perfect anything that you do.
What about imposter syndrome? Do you get imposter syndrome?
Oh no, explain that one to me.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, go on.
So it is essentially what you were just talking about.
Right.
Feeling, you've been put in this, say you're presenting something, or you've just moved into a career in presenting, thinking, I'm not good enough, no one's going to listen to this, no one's going to watch this, it's not good enough. But actually everyone else around you is going, no, you're really good, keep going.
Yeah, right.
So how do you deal with that?
Okay, cool. Now I know what it's called. I know I can put a title on it now. I'll sound really clever next time I'm explaining that scenario. I'll be like, hey, do you
ever feel it?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely with the presenting. I think with the Marines, I just felt very naturally at home. As a boy growing up, we would go to army surplus stores, buy all the kit, and go running around the fields playing army, right? So as soon as I went into the Marines, I was like, this is my natural habitat. Presenting, it couldn't be any further from, being some smelly, muddy oik in a ditch. It was all about presenting and being presentable and putting on the makeup and all of this stuff. And there was definitely a case of me going, what on earth am I doing? This is not what I should be doing. And everybody was like, you're doing great, you're fine, so keep doing what you're doing. And imposter syndrome definitely applies to the latter. Yeah,
it's a really interesting topic we talk about a lot in Aerobility.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of us sort of feel it. But I think it's just breaking it down, isn't it? And just you do something, it goes okay, so you try a bit more and try a bit more.
Yep.
But so in terms of keeping going with challenges and through the Marines, how did you keep motivated?
Yeah, it's a tough one. How did I keep motivated?
Did you draw on any source of support? Maybe the team around you?
Yeah, so your friends, your colleagues when you're in training definitely are a big source of support, because you don't want to see anybody fail. And you become very tightly knit, and you want to help them, and that's all part of it. The teamwork's huge, for the Marines. It's a massive part of it, and that again is part of the training, because when you're doing your job, if you break it down to your actual firefighting role, when it comes to going into battle and engaging in fights with people, and you've got your 8-man section, you rely on every single one of those members, your friends, like they're literally your left arm. You become so fluid at what you do that you don't need to think or know what's happening on your left and right, because you just know. It's a given. You just need to focus on what you're doing, because to excuse this horrible phrase, got your back. I hate that phrase. But they have, and as a team, that's what makes you incredibly strong.
So you touched on something just now.
Sorry.
So you touched on something just now about fail. Did you fail at all in your training?
Yeah, I did.
How did you handle it?
So there was one occasion where I failed, hands down. It was a black and white. It was a failure. It was, I think it was an 8 mile speed march or whatever, but it'd come off the back of an exercise. So we'd been out in the field for a week or whatever. Obviously, you're tired, you're wet, you want to go back to camp and have some home comforts. And they drop it on you that morning. Oh, the vehicles have broken down, or the helicopter's not arrived, so you've got to hike back. Oh, and you've got to do it in this certain time. So you're like, oh, great. And I remember doing it, and I did really well in training, and I was given a degree of leadership, like section leader and then diamond, and then I was lucky enough to go and get my King's badge, but I digress. And so I was given over this exercise a higher level of responsibility. So I stayed awake longer than some of the other guys just to make sure everybody had eaten, everybody had done that. But the one person I hadn't looked after was myself. And on that march back, I remember collapsing. I remember I was you go in a group and we're all marching along, and I remember sort of falling towards the back of this group, and I'm sort of like going dizzy, my head's wobbling all over the place, my legs are just going to jelly, and the corporal at the back's like, he's obviously got his eye, and he's like, keep going, you're going to fail, if you drop off the back, you'll put you in the wagon, the biff wagon, and that'll be you. And I just think these legs are getting like worse and worse, and I ended up just falling down at the side of the road. And so then it's onto the wagon, you failed. And it was like, oh my God, I failed the thing. And at the end of the exercise, at the weekend, we lived in this sort of tower block, and our 3 floors would be our accommodation, and our training team office was on the 2nd floor, and they would call meetings every day where they go, oh, everybody on the stairs, and we'd all run out onto the stairs and like be looking up at the corporals and our training sergeant. And he'd do sort of housekeeping and like the items of the day and business and whatever. And then at the end, we would just about go on weekend leave. And he goes, all right, yeah, just as debrief Williams, obviously, you know that you failed that test. So we'll be rerunning that test on Sunday morning, you, me, and a couple of the other members of the team. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, Sergeant. Because I knew I'd failed. And I was like, whatever I need to do to get it right, I'll do it. And then he did a couple of other bits. And then he said, you're not doing it. That was a test in itself. If I'd have gone...
Oh, okay.
If I'd have gone, all right, then he would have made me do it. But I think he was looking at my response to go, yeah, I'm up for it. I know I failed. I want to put it right.
Fantastic.
That was enough for him.
His
and
mindset.
That's how
mindset.
Yeah, exactly that. They're not looking for people that are perfect every single time. They're looking for the types of people, they're not looking for somebody that's built like, the proverbial and does what's required and then stops. They're looking for somebody who will drive themselves into the ground and not stop.
So what did you learn from that? Did you look through the situation and look at what you could have done differently? And if so, what would you have done differently to have not failed?
No, that wasn't anything. That if anything, that taught me that in failure, it's weird, this one, because in failure, that was good enough. Because I pushed myself to beyond my limit. And I guess that taught me that another thing that I have applied since the Marines to everything is do your best at everything. 9 times out of 10 you will succeed. The one time you don't succeed, it doesn't matter because you gave it your best and it wasn't meant to be. So you can go away with your head held high because it's not for you, and that's absolutely fine. But you've got to give everything your best, and that applies to that situation. And fortunately, it was all right.
There's one thing, though, that you said that I found really interesting was that you didn't look after yourself through that. You've been looking after everybody else. I think we can really apply that in life in general as well. It's very easy to feel like we need to give ourselves to this, to work, to family, to friends, and sometimes not look after ourselves. So I wondered if maybe you'd learnt from that to look after yourself a bit.
Yeah, I probably do that too well now. No, it's it's true, isn't it? I think we do from time to time. Don't prioritize ourselves, and sometimes you need to just get that in check. But where applicable, I suppose, if there's somebody that needs looking after, then you help them, don't you?
Yeah. But equally, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah, exactly that. Right. Exactly that. Always put the mask on yourself before helping others, right?
So that brings us on to flying then. So you left the Marines. So do you want to talk a little bit about leaving the Marines and how you then got into flying?
Yep. So, I had in 2007 had a bad car crash. That's what put me in a wheelchair. So I broke my back, sort of level T8, spinal cord injury. So I snapped my back and my spinal cord. And so wasn't able to continue with my role in the military, and started my recovery process from there, which is long and it's hard. And for me, one of the, I probably don't need to tell your viewers, just how difficult that is and how personal a journey it is that everybody goes on, and how long and arduous it is. And that I think with an ongoing disability, there's never a destination. It's always the journey, because for many, myself included, there isn't any sort of like, you're not going to recover or get back to things. So it's tough, and you need to find for yourself ways of distracting yourself, I suppose, or finding fulfillment in life with the disability as an extra burden, I suppose. And for me, flying was that thing. I remember thinking, right, well, what's the most important thing? I lost so much when I had the accident. I couldn't ride my motorcycle. I'd lost my job. Where I was living at the time, which with my mum, was no longer accessible. So at the drop of a hat, everything had been thrown out the window. And I was like, well, what's the most important thing? I was like, right, well, the most important thing is work. Like, if you have a job, if you have work, everything else falls into place. You have motivation, and you're driven. You have goals, tasks, and projects and things that you set yourself towards. Pardon me. You've a bit of financial security, and like when we meet people for the first time, what's the second question you ask them? It's you say, "Hi, I'm Arthur, and what do you do?" It's always, "What do you do?" You have to have something to do, and so flying for me was. It was like a eureka moment, and it sounds like a cliche, but it was Douglas Bader that inspired me to think about flying, because I'd always loved aeroplanes. I'd been absolutely fascinated by them, and of course Douglas Bader, the legless Battle of Britain ace. I remember thinking on a day, if he could fly with no legs, the equivalent of a Eurofighter Typhoon today, the Spitfire back then, with no legs. Back in the 40s, I'm sure there's something that I can do in the 20th century with flying. And so I did a search engine search for flying for disabled people, and I came across the British Disabled Flying Association, now Aerobility. And I remember sending an email, and I got a response from Mike Miller-Smith, and I was like, "Hello, I was wondering if I could do some flying," and I got really not thinking anything would come of it. And I got this response back going, "Of course you can." It was like super optimistic, super blue sky thinking, as we say. And it was like, "Yep, come down. We'll put you in an aeroplane. You can go flying." And I was like, amazing. And I had no idea where this would go. I wasn't stupid. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to, wheel myself onto the deck of an A320 or whatever and be an airline captain. But I just knew that was something that I wanted to explore. And so I went down, I did my first trial flight with Mike Owen, and I just kept coming down, and I loved it. And I just kept learning to fly, and I got my NPPL, and then I got my PPL, and then I got my night rating, my IMC, and just kept adding stuff to it. And I loved it. I loved the journey. And so that's how I got involved with flying.
How did you just touched a, you were talking about it's the journey, it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Yeah.
And everything you had, career, everything just in a moment, just gone with the car accident. What advice would you give to any of our viewers or listeners who are dealing with a massive change?
Yeah.
And how to adapt to it? I mean, how did you adapt to it, and how did you look after your mental health through that really challenging period?
Yeah.
Is there anything that our viewers and listeners could take away that you'd like to share?
Just trying to think, because I still find it really hard, and I think mental health is something that's constantly evolving and it changes.
How do you look after your mental health now? Is there anything you do? It sounds like flying really helps.
I go to the pub. no, you don't put that. So flying, distraction, and for me, work. Like I put myself wholeheartedly into projects, and what's important for me, I'm not necessarily saying that it's applicable to everybody, but I try to find roles that are nothing to do with my disability. I find, again, for me, when I do something that brings disability to the front of my mind, it brings my mood down a little bit. I need to do stuff that hasn't got anything to do with the disability. So flying, for example, when we're teaching and we're flying, disability couldn't be any further from my day, and that's great for me. Or I've got a cottage that I'm renovating down in Cornwall. When I'm building down there, that's fine. I'm distracted. I have a project, so I just throw myself into things completely, and I find that that's what helps.
Because some of our guests, when I say, how do you deal with stress? Some of them say meditation, being calm, being still. Others, sounds more like you, I've got to do something. I've got to build something. I've got to make something. I've got to be distracted by something.
Oh, yeah. Boredom is the worst thing for me. Boredom is my nemesis.
I don't do well with boredom.
Yeah. So,
but then do you take on too much? Do you find that then you go, I've taken on so many things?
Yeah.
Or do you like to be busy?
I'm pretty good at procrastination. So if I do take on something, I'm never feeling overwhelmed, because I'll find an excuse to just go and have a coffee, and then I'll get back to it. But then I'll work until 1 a.m, 2 a.m, So I never only occasionally in my life do I feel super overwhelmed. But I've always got something on the go. I'm always looking forward. I think that's important, is having something to look forward to, having something to aim for, definitely.
I watched a really interesting podcast a few weeks ago, and the lady on it said it was a challenge for 30 days. But when you, like you said, when you meet someone, the second question, what do you do? She said to ask them, what projects are you working on?
Yeah, right.
Which I thought, that's really interesting, because that suddenly opens up a different conversation. Like, I'm renovating a place in Cornwall, or, or working on a new show, or, So I thought it was really, really interesting. And I sort of thought, because it is really exciting to have stuff, like constant projects, isn't it?
Massively, yeah.
So what projects are you working on at the moment then?
So projects that we're working on at the moment, we've got farm strip flying. I've got this house down in Cornwall that I've been renovating for 4 years, which is nearly finished now. And
are you going to live down there, or
no, I'll let it out. I bought it at the beginning of lockdown, and as with a stamp duty holiday, and I needed to just break away and do something. And building was one of the things you could do in lockdown where it was all right to do. So that's what I did. And I didn't realise it would take quite this long. But yeah, anyway, it's good fun and I love it. I'm quite practical. I enjoy working with my hands, so it's good fun.
Did you have any background in building before? Or is it just a new thing that you're trying as a new challenge?
My dad was an engineer in the Navy, and he renovated the house that we grew up in. A big house that was a wreck when we were babies. And we grew up with Dad laying bricks, mixing mortar, doing woodwork, doing electrics, doing plumbing, and he would show us how to do it. And my granddad would also help him. So we were always, every weekend we had a hammer in a hand, or we were building a tree house, or we were sawing a piece of wood. And so I love doing it. So YouTube is brilliant for how do I plumb in a sink? Oh, okay, and then I go and do it, and I'm quite practical. I can see how things work, and I see something, and I'm like, right, well, how does that work? What do you need to do? And I can and it seems to work. I mean, house is still standing, and no Amazing. Pipes have leaked yet. So,
so Laura, our producer, has got a video
for
you.
Yeah.
So I would like you to talk us through through this video.
Okay.
Do you remember it?
Vaguely, I remember this screen grab. Shall I watch it?
So for everybody who is listening to this, as opposed to watching it, so Arthur's just looking through a video of his first solo with us at
is it?
Aerobility.
Right.
So talk me through how it felt.
Here we go. Right. Oh, my Lord. That coat. That was brilliant. I do remember my first solo. I also remember my first solo navigational exercise where your first solo is such an overwhelming experience, because you are, right, all of your checks, I'm up, I'm around the circuit, I'm coming back into land, I'm landed, right, did you have fun? Yes. Do you know really what just happened? Probably not, no, because it's over so quickly. You're just like, wow. Oh, as you can see the smile on my face there, though. I was quite a happy man with that, I think. Yeah. I'm glad I have some hair now, though. But yeah, my first solo navigational exercise, it was out to Kingsclear. Was it Kingsclear? Yeah, Kingsclear. Oh yeah. Yeah, my first solo exercise was out to Kingsclear Mast and back. And I remember taking off, happy days, do all your departure checks and all that stuff. And then you set the aeroplane up, and just before we're doing like a Frida check or something, you've got 30 seconds in the aeroplane where you don't actually have to do anything. And I remember thinking, gosh, there's a momentary piece of quiet where you can stop and like have a look around and take it all in. And I remember that for me is like the most, I'm actually flying an aeroplane and there is nobody on board this thing other than you responsible for bringing it back down in one piece. And that was quite good. Yeah. That was a long time ago now though.
So tell me about the flying that you did with Aerobility.
Right. So yeah, I did loads of flying with Aerobility. I did it in PA28, Golf Bravo Romeo Foxtrot Mike, I think, and also was it November, I think, with the registrations. Anyway, so yeah, like I did my PPL, I did my IMC, I did my night rating with them, and I just loved flying. I just knew that was my distraction at the time. I just thought that this is something that I feel very restricted in my day-to-day life physically because I'm a very physically motivated person. I was very physically active and capable before my accident. And I thought that flying was physically and mentally stimulating. And I just thought it was great. This is something that most able-bodied people wouldn't be able to say they can do. Yet I'm, pretty severely disabled and I can fly an aeroplane. Like, Lee, how is that possible? I think that's amazing. And so I was bitten by the bug, as they say. And
expensive bug.
An expensive bug, yeah.
A good bug.
It didn't matter. I didn't care. Honestly, I was like, I don't mind. As long as I throw all my money at this, it's just great. It's just, yeah, I just needed to do it.